Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really big topic, Russia's shifting global strategy.
That's right.
We've spent time with some recent analytical articles, expert commentary on how Russia seems to view the world right now, its relationships, and, well, what its overall game plan might be.
Exactly. And our job really is to sift through these analyses, these different perspectives, and try to pull out the core ideas for you.
Yeah, to really understand the main currents in Russia's geopolitical thinking today. We'll unpack it together.
Let's do it.
Okay, so jumping right in, a theme that comes up again and again in these analyses is this idea that Russia believes the established world order, the one dominated by the West, is weakening. What's the basis for that view?
Well, the sources point strongly towards the war in Ukraine being a catalyst or maybe an accelerant. From the perspective presented in these analyses, Russia sees the conflict as exposing weaknesses, not just their own, but also within the West.
Exposing weaknesses, like cracks in the Western alliance, maybe.
Yeah, sort of. There's this perception, according to the analysis, that the Western unity we hear about might not be quite as solid as it appeared, or perhaps sustainable long-term under pressure.
Okay. And that perception seems to position Russia, in their view at least, as standing against Western, particularly U.S. dominance.
That's definitely a key takeaway from the analysis. It's framed as pushing back against perceived American and Western hegemony. It's not just reactive, it seems, but a more fundamental challenge.
So defending their own interests, but also actively trying to shape a different kind of world.
Precisely. The idea of a multipolar world comes up constantly in these sources. A world with multiple centers of power, not just, Washington and its allies calling the shots.
Right. Okay. So if that's the worldview, this sense of a changing order, what are the main strategic pillars driving Russia's actions now? What are the priorities?
Several key things stand out in the analysis. Number one seems to be strengthening national sovereignty, protecting their own decision-making, and also creating more strategic depth, a buffer zone.
Which naturally leads to focusing on their immediate neighborhood, doesn't it?
It does. Consolidating influence in what they see as their geopolitical sphere is clearly a major objective, according to these sources.
And countering external influence there.
Yes, absolutely. Countering what Russia interprets as Western interference is a huge driver. Alongside that, there's this consistent emphasis on maintaining and even expanding Russia's role on the global stage. It's presented as essential for their security, their standing.
It feels like there's a historical dimension, too. The analyses mention Russia drawing on its history, its national identity.
Very much so. That's highlighted as a core source of strength, tapping into this sense of historical legacy and national identity to justify their current path and, well, to rally support. It's a powerful narrative tool.
Okay, let's shift to relationships. How does Russia, according to these analyses, manage its ties with other big global players? China comes up a lot.
Oh, definitely. The analysis uses some strong terms: strategic alliance, comprehensive partnership. It's portrayed as a really deepening relationship.
And the thinking there is that this partnership helps counter the West.
That seems to be the primary strategic driver mentioned in the sources, yes. Counterbalancing Western influence. China is explicitly called a major partner. It's fundamental to their current strategy.
And then the flip side, the West. The U.S. and Europe. How's that relationship described?
Well, no surprises there, really. The analysis describes it mainly in terms of competition and increasingly confrontation.
Driven by Ukraine, primarily.
Ukraine has massively amplified the tensions, yes. But the analysis suggests the roots are deeper, fundamentally different visions for the global order, and of course the long-standing issue of NATO expansion, which Russia consistently views as a threat.
What about beyond the big powers? The sources mention efforts in Africa, for instance.
Right. The analysis points to a conscious effort to build relationships in Africa and other regions. It's part of that multipolarity push, diversifying partnerships and, again, countering perceived Western dominance.
And they sometimes draw on older connections.
Yeah, the analysis notes how Russia sometimes references its Soviet-era support for anti-colonial movements. It's interesting how that history is being repurposed in today's context.
Let's get more specific. The analyses bring up the color revolutions: Georgia, 2003, Ukraine, 2004, 2005. How are those events framed?
They're presented, in the Russian view, according to these sources, as textbook examples of Western interference, attempts to undermine Russia's influence in its own backyard.
So that perception really solidified their approach to neighbors.
It seems so. The analysis suggests that those events were quite formative, reinforcing a narrative of Western encroachment and shaping subsequent Russian policy.
And then there's Syria, Russia's backing of Assad. How does that fit the pattern?
Syria is cited as a key example of Russia projecting power beyond its immediate borders, supporting an ally despite significant international pressure. It demonstrated a willingness to defend its strategic interests, in this case, in the Middle East.
Okay. And closer to home, the sources mention strengthening the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization.
Yes, that's Russia's regional military alliance. Strengthening it is seen as a way to solidify security ties within its sphere and perhaps act as a bit of a counterweight to alliances like NATO.
The analysis also touches on, let's say, less conventional tools, information warfare, media narrative.
Definitely. The strategic use of media, shaping narratives both domestically and internationally, is highlighted as a significant part of Russia's toolkit. Influencing perceptions is key.
Switching gears a bit, there's mention of the Northern Sea Route, an economic and logistical focus.
A major one, according to the analysis. It offers potentially shorter shipping routes, access to Arctic resources. It's seen as having huge strategic economic potential for Russia.
Which brings us to the Arctic itself. The claims over resources, the continental shelf. That sounds like another area of friction.
It certainly is. Russia's assertiveness in the Arctic, detailed in the sources, reflects its ambition to secure resources and project power in a region that's becoming, increasingly important geopolitically. And yes, that creates potential conflict with other Arctic nations.
Finally, there's an ideological layer mentioned. A rejection of liberal ideas.
Yeah, the analysis suggests Russia sees the West as promoting a specific set of liberal values globally, values they fundamentally reject.
So what's the counter-narrative?
It's an emphasis on national values, traditional values, the importance of a strong state, presented as an alternative to what they frame as Western liberalism. This ideological clash, it really does seem to fuel some of the geopolitical tension we see.
Right. It adds another layer to the competition. Okay, so let's try to summarize the main threads from these analyses.
Okay.
It looks like Russia perceives the Western-led order as weakening, or at least changing significantly. They're prioritizing their own sovereignty, their strategic space, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And a key part of their strategy involves building a much closer relationship with China.
A crucial element, yes.
While the relationship with the West is defined mostly by competition, even confrontation, playing out across many different areas, military, economic, ideological.
I think that captures the essence of what these analyses are suggesting, yeah. A multifaceted strategy for a world they see in flux.
So, thinking about all this, about Russia's analysis and their resulting strategy, leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What are the potential long-term consequences for, well, global stability as we know it?
Yeah, what does this shift really mean down the road?
And could there be unforeseen challenges or maybe even opportunities that arise from these changing power dynamics? And perhaps most importantly, what are the core assumptions driving Russia's view of the world, according to these analyses? And, how might reality test those assumptions in the future?
Definitely a lot to think about there. How robust are those assumptions?
Exactly. Plenty to mull over. Thanks for digging into this with us today.